Hello, good morning everyone. Today we will be discussing Unit 15 from Organizational Change and Development. This is Vaishali Sharma, Professor Management. Hope you all are doing good. So let us discuss change first of all. The learning outcomes of this unit are: describe forces that act as stimulants to change, summarize the sources of individual and organizational resistance to change, summarize Levin's three-step change model, explain the values underlying most OD efforts. So let us begin with discussing the concept of change. As we all know that change is only permanent in this world. So if we have to define organization change, it can be the process of alteration of organizational structure and implementation of new procedures and organizational structure which helps an organization to adapt to the changing nature of its business environment and grab new business opportunities. Organizational change is an ongoing process of social construction that comprises spiral patterns of discursive change and restructuring of collective meaning. So this is the definition which is given by Francis and Sinclair. Another definition from Von D. Ven and Poole is: organizational change is expressed as an empirical observation of difference in form, quality or state over time in an organizational entity. And this entity may be a person's job, a work group, an organizational strategy, a product, a program or the overall organization. So on the basis of these definitions, we can identify the features or the characteristics of organizational change, which is it is a continuous process. Any part or element of organization that affects the whole organization leads to change, and sub-elements of organization may be affected more and others less if change takes place. The aim of organizational change is to modify or transform the organization which affects the status quo. Change is inevitable. Organization change affects individual behavior, group behavior and management behavior. And lastly, the change supports the organization's survival. And here I am reminded of one article I was reading related to Fortune 500 companies. So Fortune top 100 list was somewhere started in 1960s, and related to that I was reading that out of 100 only hardly 30 to 33% companies are surviving and they are doing good. So what happened to rest 67 of the companies? So they did not accept the desired change and moved on. So they are nowhere now. Let us discuss the factors causing organizational change. So there are two types of factors: internal factor and external factors. Internal factors are within the organization, which deals with changes in managerial personnel, working conditions, delegation of power and authority, employee motivation, workplace culture and environment, policies and procedures established by organization, and employee expectations. External factors are globalization, technological change, economic change, social and political change, workforce diversity and demographic dividend. So nowadays we can see that women employees are getting into jobs, so the demographic dividend is changing. Then we have the most largest youth population, our country, India. So again the demographic dividend is changing. What are the different types of organizational change? They may begin with organization-wide change. So this is a large-scale change, as from the word itself, which involves the resizing of organization, restructuring of the organization. Then there is transformational change, which deals with formulation and implementation of new strategies. Unplanned change is random and spontaneous events occurring, and the organizations do not have time to plan and prepare for that, but they have to take action. Those are unplanned changes. Then next is remedial change. These remedial changes are the reactionary or corrective actions taken by the organization's management. Then personnel change, when the company undergoes mass hiring or layoffs or changes in the organization's human resource structure. So it may be in the review, job analysis, job designs, which may create new jobs, which may delete the older jobs. So that can also happen. And nowadays you might be hearing that a lot of e-commerce companies and ID companies are going for mass layoffs. So that is personnel change. Then proactive change. So these changes are pre-planned changes that the company undergoes to avoid a potential future threat or to capitalize on a potential future opportunity. And what best example then Geo would be? Geo is coming and changing the rule of the game, that is proactive change. Coming on to process of organization change, this has following steps. First of all, identify the need for change. Why and where do we need change? Determining the organization elements to be changed. So there are majorly 4 elements where change takes place. These elements are strategy, structure, people and technology. Then planning for effective change, how the change will be executed or initiated. So the most important factor in this is to communicate well in advance and properly with the advantages of change to the involved stakeholders. Then change definitely becomes smooth. Then assessing the changes forces. So there are in Levin's model we will study in further that there are basically 2 types of forces, driving forces and restraining forces. So which forces are powerful? Only if the driving forces are powerful, then we can ensure change. If the restraining forces are powerful, then the change becomes really tough and difficult. And finally, the action for change, which is the implementation and monitoring phase. Then there is a very popular model for change which is known as Levin's 3-step change model. So there are 3 steps in this: unfreeze, change or movement, and refreeze. So it seems a very small model, but it encapsulates very vast process and actions required for that. So when we talk of unfreeze, it means to unlearn the older methods which are creating that deviation or gap. So in this, first of all, the need for change is recognized. Then we have to encourage the replacement of older behaviors and attitudes. Then the organization needs to ensure that there is a strong support from management, because otherwise change can never happen. And lastly, manage and understand the doubts and concerns of the stakeholders involved. Then comes the next stage, change or movement stage, in which the proper change is planned, implemented, and all the employees or the stakeholders involved are helped, supported, facilitated to learn newer skills and newer ways to do things. And the third step is refreeze, which means these changes have to be reinforced and stabilized so that the employees or the organization doesn't move back to the returns to the older methods. It integrates changes into normal way of doing things. It develops ways to sustain the change, and at the end, the change, if it has happened as desired, it really calls for a celebration. Apart from that, what I have read and learned from the growing organizations, that raise by praise. So if whether the one step is taken or how smallest level of change takes place, that should definitely be appreciated. Then next, forces of change in Levin's model. As I have discussed earlier, that there are 2 types of forces: restraining forces, driving forces. And here you can see that there is status quo and desired state. So definitely at status quo, the change has to be taken place, and we want to, or the organization wants to reside to the desired state. So unfreezing, movement and refreezing. So if the driving forces which lead to change are powerful, then only movement will happen. If the restraining forces, means the forces in support of the status quo, are powerful, then movement will not happen. It will be really tough to move towards desired state. Mostly the status quo will be maintained. So if we can take the example of if we have to bring change in employee behaviors and attitude, and suppose if there is problem of absenteeism and it is hampering the productivity. So first of all, the organization needs to identify that why. First of all, what is the problem? The problem we could identify as absenteeism. Then why it is happening, that will be leading to the force identification, restraining forces, and how we can drive the employees towards a better way, desired way. So before initiating every change process, the organization, wherever the change is initiated, has to identify the status quo, the desired state, the driving forces, and the restraining forces. Every change is resisted. आप कहीं भी देख लीजिए उसको, हम अपनी लाइफ में, अपने फैमिली में, कहीं पर भी होता है, छोटे से छोटा चेंज भी हम रेजिस्ट करते हैं. What is that resistance? So this is something, the opposing behavior of employees or people. So basically we all become very much comfortable in our present zones or levels. So that comfort zone itself leads to resistance to change. It is also an unwillingness to adapt the new circumstances or ways of doing things. It can happen with individuals, relationships, or organizations. So this is one of the important sources of functional conflicts if it is dealt properly. Otherwise, it can become a dysfunctional conflict. It can be in terms of overt or immediate and covert nature. So at times you may ignore or you may not be able to see those changes, और फिर वो बाद में निकल कर के आते हैं. But definitely we have to identify the resistance occurring. So what are the reasons for resistance to change? Majorly there are two reasons: individual level and organizational level. So at individual level there are economic reasons, psychological reasons, social reasons. And economics में job security, they may lose their jobs if any kind of new change is there. So ये इस तरीके का perception हमेशा एक डर रहता है employees के दिमाग में. Then skill obsolescence, whatever skills they have learned will be out of date. Then fear of economic loss, reduced opportunity for incentives. Then ego defensiveness, embracing status quo, comfort zones, low tolerance to change, and fear of unknown. So at times we are not even clear whether we will lose jobs, what will happen to us. And social reasons are social displacement. So these social reasons are basically within the organization itself, कि हो सकता है कि हमारी आज जो इम्पोर्टेंस है वो ना रहे सबके बीच में. So this is also one of the fears. Then group resistance and lack of trust on change agent. And if we talk about organizational level resistance, it is threat to existing power and influence, rigid organization structure, unfavorable organization culture and norms, resource constraints, and sunk cost associated with the change. How can we overcome this resistance to change? There are certain tactics which can help overcome resistance to change. First is education and communication. So all those stakeholders who are going to become the party to this change process, they need to be very clearly educated about the reasons for change, the impacts of the present status, and how change is going to affect for the betterment. So this has to be educated and it has to be communicated very clearly and in a positive manner. Participation and involvement. So the stakeholders or the employees must be involved in that change process and they should be given the ownership so that the resistance is minimized. Facilitation and support. These methods can be highly effective when dealing with individual resistance, but are time consuming and run a high risk of failure also. Maybe that support is not resultant into the desired outcome. Negotiation and agreement, trade-offs and incentives are offered in exchange for acceptance. Manipulation and cooptation, change employees' focus and attention to their issues can be quick and easy ways to minimize resistance. And explicit and implicit coercion. And खुदा ना खास्ता अगर ऐसी situation है कि you don't have any choice to do any of the above mentioned methods, then the managers have to rely on force to push past change. So this method is quick and effective, but it does not build commitment and also it may be short-lived. After change comes the step A, organization development. So this is a kind of extension of a refreezing step. So the organization is developing with the newer processes. This development is a planned systematic change in values or operations of employees to create overall growth. It differs from everyday operations and workflow improvements, and on the basis of this, R. Beckard has defined OD as a change strategy which is very well planned, which is organization wide, and which has to be managed from the top to increase organization effectiveness and health through planned interventions in the organization process. Then there are OD values which need to be taken care to make organization development a successful activity. So these OD values are respect for people, trust and support, power equalization, confrontation and participation. What is the process of organization development? Problem identification, planning strategy for change, implementing the change, and evaluation, monitoring and evaluation of that change process. So with this, we come to the end of this topic. Thank you so much.